What's up, everybody? This is the McAllister's podcast coming to you live once again. Another fun little live stream here. I'm so glad that the YouTube's actually working this time. I figured it out. I had one of the links from a former sponsor got fucking tagged as like being dangerous or something like that. So like it wiped my whole channel out. I had like a 2-week strike. I'm like, what the fuck did I do this time? But thankfully it all got resolved and we're back here live. And I thought it would be fun today since, the last time I did this episode called Moronic Christianity, which I want to say for the record too, like I know there are a lot of people who listen to this who probably are Christian. I don't think that like people are necessarily morons for being Christian. I think there are a lot of morons who are Christian, but I don't think I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. Like I don't think they're related necessarily. There are very smart people who are Christian. But I think there are very smart people who are also socialists. I think socialism is a moronic ideology. Funny enough, like is socialism actually came from Christianity. I think that's something that a lot of people like in this day and age. It's that's such a weird idea, right? That like, we actually we like this idea, which is like kind of associated with like the radical left or just the left in general, which tends to, it's not really the case, especially in America, but like it tends to not be religious, and then like the political right is considered the religious idea. So, for some people think that those two ideas are like, it's insane that they'd be interchanged or like, connected, right? But they actually are. But anyways, I thought last time we had a really fun time with that. I'm actually going to shift it over right now. If anybody, I know last time we did this, people dropped comments and had questions. So I will, you're more welcome to do that. I will try my best to answer them at the end of the live stream, just because I don't want, I don't want to necessarily get distracted and have that be a whole thing. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with this live stream, kind of dissecting, moronic Christianity, is Jordan Peterson recently did a Jubilee style debate where it's actually really I think this is just really telling about I think there is such a thing as the woke right that's really come to fruition post Trump's election, or maybe even coming up before that. I think a lot of it started with like the Israel conflict, right? Like when that started happening, you saw these figures like Jordan Peterson who were very pro free speech, who really advocated for all these things. And then once something happened that they didn't like, they immediately used the same tactics, right? And I think a lot of this interview is him doing this. There are at least two different instances where he completely shuts people down. He's like, don't be a smart ass. I'm not going to talk to you. Fine. I can understand that. But like, if you're going to be this guy who's going to go in and have an open discussion, like, if you're gonna have this like guardrail of like, oh hey, I'm not really I'm not gonna engage with you because you're gonna cast it as like, oh, I don't like your attitude, but really you just don't want to engage with the idea. Like that's woke. That's wokeism 101 in my opinion. Like wokeism, no matter whether it's the right or the left, it's all about not having actual good faith conversations and just stating your viewpoint, and that's it, right? So he did this debate. He did this Jubilee debate, which I want to say from the get-go, like, this has to be one of the worst debate formats ever created. I'm sorry. Like, watching people debate on Fox News or CNN is like, it's like a scholarly debate compared to this. The format is literally, it's literally, they have a bell. And then it's not even, so here's one aspect of it, right? It's like not even about like your smarts or your intelligence. It's literally like who can run to the chair the fastest gets to talk to the guy, which is just stupid. And then they can get cut off if like the whole group, like they hold up a flag, and like if like basically democracy, like right, like the idea of democracy, if like the majority votes you out, then they cut you off at a certain point. Like, okay, next. So I mean, this is like really like the lowest bar of debating, in my opinion. So I mean, there's that just to start this off with. But I thought there were several points in this that I thought were worth dissecting. I think these episodes, these clips are a little longer, so we'll see how long this goes. I do at the end also want to touch upon Piers Morgan, but yeah, we're gonna mainly focus on Jordan Peterson. So let's watch this first clip. And I want to say too, like I was talking with somebody about this like before the episode started. I don't think that like necessary. I'm not here proponing that like necessarily every atheist on this was like a genius, right? Like I've said before, I think unlike Christianity, atheism can be very broad. Like the only prerequisite that you have to be an atheist is to say, I don't believe in God, or at the very least, there is little to no evidence of a God. I think a true atheist needs to acknowledge that it could be possible, because I think that's the most scientific way to go about something. But like the evidence and the logic is just tenfold stacked up against Christianity. And you know, like you can tell that a lot of these people are like liberal college kids. They don't really know what the fuck they're talking about. So like, you know, you're basically you're scraping from the bottom of the barrel, basically, right, for a lot of these. But I did think, despite that, despite like, you know, the execution maybe not being the best, I did think there were a lot of good points that were actually brought up in this. So let's just go ahead. Let's just start off and play this first clip here.
So I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, you know, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
what literal way?
The way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, you know, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
See, and we're already seeing that, like, and I'll give him this. Granted, like, a lot of this is because of the way that this is structured. Like, they only have a certain amount of minutes to really have these discussions, so there's that aspect of it too. But I think this person actually brings up a very good point, and this is actually something that I think, like, and we'll get to this later, the viral moment where the kid really called him out for being like, are you really Christian? And he's like, no, I'm not a Christian. Like, you're going to show up to this debate, you're going to proponent all these ideals, but like, you know, in order for him to seem more educated or superior or whatever, he's going to kind of muddy the waters of what Christianity really is. And he does this throughout the whole hour and a half. Like, he says, like, oh, well, God really isn't this. But look, let's be real. 90+% of Christians, the people that he has talked about, like, you know, giving meaning to it and converting and whatever, like, they believe that definition. They believe the definition that, like, God, yes, was an omniscient being. I can't say that right. and like, just all the prerequisites that come with like that very old school idea of Christian or like of God. I think this is a very good point, and we'll keep watching this, but I think this is just one point that he just refuses to grapple with. He continuously sidesteps. He continuously just avoids this whole thing. So maybe I'm wrong. I only watched this the one time, granted. So maybe I'm full of shit. But let's play this. Keep playing this.
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that there are multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I think that, I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes.
And I think this is a point where the person debating Jordan really misses the mark. Is he can't just admit like I'm someone like personally like I think there is a singular truth. Like I don't believe in the idea of multiple truths. And I think it's very common for people who think in that sphere tend to like, be, I don't want to say like too open-minded, but almost in a way like so open-minded to the point where like you can't really like concretely make a definition, right? Like I was just talking to someone before this, like how like, if you're like, let's say, you proponent all these ideas of socialism, but you like can't admit that you're a socialist. Like I think you're just kind of being like you're just not wanting to grapple with the idea that like there is like a singular truth, like there's right and wrong, there's a clear line, and like I don't like, and we'll get into this later too, like they'll get into this later too, but like I don't think you need Christianity as a moral framework to know that that's wrong. I think that's ridiculous. Anyways, keep playing.
But that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like I'm kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you can imagine.
I infer, right? I can infer.
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'll answer for him. Experience. I think it's experience. I think it's knowledge. I think that's the principle that you infer things from. And again, like I said, this is why I like. I don't even really like. Part of me just doesn't even really like dissecting this because it's such a shit format. Like Jubilee, I'm sorry, they're like one of the worst forms of like quote unquote debate, right? Like and like in a way, like I can almost see like how he's not really grappling with that either. But like, yeah, I mean, it's just like education and like what we know, what we empirically know, what we learn, and our experiences. I mean, that's how we create a moral framework. And that's why morality isn't universal. I think, and that's a distinction, right? There's a singular truth, but that's different from having truth be universal or that everyone shares that truth. So, and I won't even say that's multiple truth because like I have what I believe is true, or not even believe, what I know is true for the most part. And somebody else can think a different thing, but I'm going to think they're wrong. I'm still going to know that there's there's a real answer, right? When if you have a math problem, there's one answer. You could have three different people say that there's three different answers. You go on the internet, that happens all the fucking time. But that's my point. Anyways, let's keep playing.
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscious is defined by my empathy and my reason, or my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
right and wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Where does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
how do you constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? Mm-hmm. We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's fair, where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see. This kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah defined it.
Okay, so as Elijah defines God.
But this is the problem. Like, he refuses to define it. Jordan Peterson himself refuses to define it. He takes multiple instances, multiple different points in the Bible where other people define it, but he himself refuses to define it. Because he knows if he himself defines it, that he puts himself in a box. And he doesn't want to put himself in that box. So he's going to play this, like, one of the comments on this, I think, was like, just encapsulated it perfectly. They were like, Jordan Peterson was the kid growing up that when playing rock, paper, scissors, he played black hole. And that's like, I thought about that watching this whole thing, and I was like, God, they're exactly right. They're exactly right. Like, he can't compete with, or he can't contend with it seems like there are just points where he can't contend with the ideas, or he sidesteps into something else. So
defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also defined it that way.
As I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm just pointing out to you how God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how
statement.
do we specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the Mona
I'm
Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay. So that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of God.
No, I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay, so
in Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever,
it's not whoever.
How many people define it like that? Come on. I don't think I've ever talked to a Christian and what's God? Your conscience. Okay.
Elijah is one of the major Old Testament prophets.
All right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
You
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because, again,
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question, and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not in the least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God is conscience.
He said it in the beginning of the fucking thing. He said, what? That the God is like the omniscient being? He literally said it. So then he's just like sidestepping me, be like, no, I this is how I said it. I said it's conscious. It's like, and what I think the other guy's doing a really bad job articulating. He's like, okay, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what 95% of people who identify or, are sympathetic to Christian ideals interpret God as. This is Jordan Peterson's idea of God. And I mean, to be fair, I've never really listened through his religious stuff or the religious podcasts. It's not really worth my time, honestly. But I've never heard this. I've literally never heard this definition of God. So I think the guy, although he's not articulating it really well, I think he is correct in saying that he is being intellectually disingenuous.
It's a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think
you
your
should
point is
care about
irrelevant
that.
to the way that people.
If you're going to argue a stance, you should care about that. If I'm going to argue anarchism, I should understand what the majority of people interpret anarchism to be. That's not crazy.
And to use these words, your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of God.
point. You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
No, he was retreating. He was retreating 100%. Like, and this is the thing. Like, people are gonna watch that and they're still gonna side with JP, even though he completely, he was being intellectually disingenuous. I agree with that. He was retreating into this. I think he actually said it really well at the end. Like, he was retreating into a fog in a sense. Okay, let's play.
So your claim that morality.
I'm sorry. This is another clip that I found, and this isn't that long. It's shorter than I thought it would be. I thought was another really good moment in the debate. So let's play it.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky, because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain.
First of all, really, I should really go through these claims myself. I was going to make a list and I didn't. But this claim, morality and purpose cannot be found within science, I don't necessarily disagree with that. Yeah, the scientific method, you can articulate things from that, but it's not really like that. The morality is coming from the science. It's coming from how you deduce the science. The idea of slavery, right? We can deduce, if you enslave someone, that has a negative impact. Not just, even if you're, succeed in the short term with a slave, that's just going to have a negative impact for everyone. And over a long enough period of time, the net is negative. And we have evolved through history to know, not only, people argue the whole empathy has evolved. I don't even know if that's necessarily accurate, but that our understanding of the consequences have evolved. I've talked about this plenty of times. Ayn Rand talks about in the book The Virtue of Selfishness how selfishness is not inherently a bad thing. Us treating people better is selfish because it makes us feel good. We create relationships that then benefit us, but that's not bad, right? It's not it's obviously not bad to be a good person. So yeah, I wouldn't even necessarily disagree with that. It can't be found within science. That doesn't mean the answer is that it's found in the Bible or that it's found in Christianity. So I'll just say that. But anyway.
Of morality and purpose. Yes, exactly. Okay. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part, technically,
also,
to
he
eliminate
looks
such considerations from its purview a priori.
A couple of these motherfuckers smoked a blunt before this.
Science is value-free. Mm-hmm. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular.
I don't think that's necessarily true, that you have to assume things about science before they take place. That's the whole point of the scientific method, is that yes, you have assumptions, but they get proven. So then it's not really accurate to say you have to have these assumptions in order for it to be placed. You don't have to have assumptions. You could start from ground zero and use the scientific method and then get to those assumptions. The assumptions we do have, I think, are then again predicated on the scientific method. But Anyways.
Since you yourself are a Christian, right?
People debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery's wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's immoral.
that's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't that
Well,
immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Wouldn't you
And
say
so slavery...
The same group who, led colonization, the Crusades, the people who arguably had one of the biggest movements of slavery in history. They solved it. This is just a dishonest position. It's just a dishonest, and I think they even argue this in later in. But people always will equate that. I was arguing with this one guy, and he was Christianity, and I think it's the same point. Christianity ended slavery in America, and I'm like, not really. I mean, we had a civil war, and the federal government declared it to be illegal in the South, and then that was. I mean, there's no court. I mean, that's the state. That's not Christianity, and people really like to intertwine. It's but everybody was, which just isn't true that everybody was Christian. There were plenty of secularists in that day. This book I'm reading right now, called Empire of Liberty, dates from, I believe, 1783. Shit, I don't know, 1780s or late 70s to 1815. And in that time period, there was a lot of growth of secular ideas. And people who are prominently secular. So it's disingenuous to paint this entire country or the people, it's the same people who say America's a Christian nation. I remember one time, this is a funny story. I was in history class, and I had this teacher, and he was talking about how America was a Christian nation. And I raised my hand, and I was like, but America is freedom of religion. So how is it then a Christian nation? And I have heard articulated educated answers on this, and okay, I still disagree, but okay, that's fair. He didn't even give that. He just said, it just is. Moving on. That's the level of these people operate on, but
itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on slavery.
And wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across
I just don't think that's
long
accurate.
spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution of morality.
What do you mean by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture and history, right? We get better.
Well, they did do it based on culture and history, but culture and history have their foundations too. So.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
Everyone
Bible. Based on the Bible. They looked at it and they justified it. In the United States, in the Deep South, they justified slavery
but
based
the main
on the Bible.
the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently against slavery, and it was about the only movement in the history of the human race that had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their understanding
that's one
of
way
morality.
of looking at it. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery
that doesn't mean there's no argument.
Were both driven by.
If anyone doesn't have the argument, it's him. He's this guy saying that humans evolved. to what I was saying before, to realize like, oh, hey, slavery's wrong, right? And what he's completely sidestepped. He's claiming that he's the one that doesn't have an argument when he is actually the one that doesn't have an argument. Like, he's making the same argument about Christianity, that even though Christianity was actually the driving force in, like he said, like justifying slavery and keeping slavery in, but it was also the thing that, was against it. The problem is, one of these things is interpretive. One of these things isn't. Christianity is interpretive. The Bible's interpretive. People can read the Bible, have XYZ interpretation from it. But humans and evolution and science, there's one singular truth in that. Depending on like where, like the scientific method, you have a hypothesis, you test it out, you come to a conclusion. That's one string. That's singular. Christianity doesn't have that. It can go any way you choose, right? You could go down the Christian line to the end to think that you need to sacrifice virgins, right? Like there's just no reality in this.
By humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
Evolving morality based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay, fine.
So with women's suffrage as well is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity, such as Pentecostal movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the idea of God.
Fine, but what's your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans, regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences as humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscience is also something that has evolved over time. And I think that's something that does evolve in morality and empathy.
What's the evidence?
I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so. Just like women's suffrage.
There's lots
and just like homosexuality.
All human societies were slave owning. So you can't blame that on the Bible.
If humanity decided...
Oh, wait, address that first.
What,
all
about slavery?
Human societies were slavers. So you can't blame that on the Bible.
Well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
based
in
on
the
their
UK.
Interpretation of the Bible.
It was the Protestant Christians...
Which evolves over time.
Yeah. I think he actually did a really good job at the end saying, like, yeah, no, it's not because it bolsters it. And then, but Jordan Peterson, even though it's like it'll bolster it, it's like, but it did this, but it did that. It's like it's similar to like the argument of the state, just the like government and the state in general. It's like, the government created whatever, like like let's say like the legalization of liquor, right? Or just like it had the like what is the fucking term? Abolition? No, the abolition of alcohol. Let's just say that. I can't think of the fucking term. The government instilled that, right? But then at some point it lifted that legalization up, or like with cannabis. Cannabis, right? Like that happened. But it's like, okay, but that would be like saying like, oh, the government is the reason that alcohol got legalized. It's a very like, it's like kind of like with the Israel or like the Gaza thing, right? Like how like people will just like, they'll pick October 7th and they'll be like, oh, hey, the Palestinians are doing this to us. But then like all you have to do is go back like 10 years and be like, oh, well, they've been controlled by the IDF and all, they've been in an apartheid state in the IDF and all that shit. But like, so, I mean, he's doing this exact same thing with the Bible. Okay, this is the clip that went viral. And honestly, there isn't even really a lot intellectually to be taken from this, but I just find it hilarious.
You're saying atheist.
I find it hilarious. And it's also just, I feel like it just cuts to the point of what I was talking about earlier with the woke right, like him actually making like a yes, he's being a smartass, yes, he's being condescending, but he is making ultimately is making a really good point. Like, I thought we were here to debate a Christian, and you can't even like say that you're a Christian. And he just refuses to debate him. Yeah, he probably could have had a better attitude about it, sure. But still, I found it intellectually disingenuous. So
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
And also, I want to say before this, this is also another point I don't disagree with. Like, yes, I think atheists can worship something. There's actually someone, I didn't pull the clip because I thought it was just kind of weird, but there is a clip later where somebody talks about their wife, and Jordan is like, do you worship your wife? And he's like, and the guy can't even admit that he worships his wife, because in his mind that would be anti-atheist or whatever. No, I don't. Like, if you look at the definition of worshiping, which is like just, I should probably look it up. Come on, Coleman. Come on. You should have this pulled up, Coleman, you fucking idiot. The feeling or expression of reverence and adoration from a deity, or as a verb showing reverence and adoration for honor with religious rites. So I guess in this definition is actually directly related to religion. But if we're going to take it in the term, let's give Jordan Peterson, let's extend an olive branch to him. If he's going to, this definition of worship, which is like, it doesn't need to be a deity. It can be an idea. It can be a person. I think atheists do that all the time. My fiance, I think I do worship her in a sense. Like, I do serve her and sacrifice myself for her and do anything I can for her. I don't think that's disingenuous to atheism. Again, I think this is just something that Christians tend to do, is because they live in the box of Christianity and they think, oh, if you subscribe to something like this, like you have to follow a certain set. I think they then cast that onto atheism. And, to a fault of atheists in general, I think atheists then kind of do the same thing to themselves, because of that same reason. Like, they grew up in, like, a lot of them, they reject, like, they reject religion, they reject Christianity because they themselves grew up in that system. So then they kind of tend to stay in that framework. So I think that's just something that, like, a lot of the questions and the claims that Jordan Peterson brings up in this are related around that. I just find it just disingenuous, or not even disingenuous, but just not accurate. So, but regardless, I think this clip's actually really funny. So,
tend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I don't think that's
your
crazy.
Understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Well, yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to.
Attend to.
Prioritize.
Do
And
Catholics
sacrifice for.
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand.
I said there was a hierarchy.
And he
as
is
well.
putting words in his
You
mouth.
attend to
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
how do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell.
Why are you here? I think that's a valid point. Like, yeah, dude. If you're going to show up to a fucking debate for 20 atheists versus a Christian, but I mean, Jubilee changed the title 4 hours after they put it out to be from 20 atheists versus 1 Christian to Jordan Peterson versus 20 Christians or 20 atheists. I get that shit mixed up. Like, yeah, I think that's a valid point. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think that's a pretty valid point.
Me, I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Like, look, come on. Regardless of what your beliefs are, what you identify as, that's just funny. That is just funny. I mean, like, yes, he's obviously being a smartass, but like, I don't know. Like, if I had somebody in my podcast and they were being a smartass, like, I don't feel like, I mean, maybe there's a point where like, if they were like personally attacking me, then maybe I would walk away from that. But like, beyond that, like, if he had continued on this conversation, like if Jordan had like actually just, been like, okay, whatever, I'll deal with your bullshit. He probably could have like smoked him. Maybe not smoked him, but like he could have come away looking a lot brighter than this person. Because I mean, look, this person was arrogant. He did put words in his mouth. He was definitely trying to have like a gotcha moment. The fact that like he even knew like, excuse me, like, he even knew like what church he was attending and stuff like that's kind of like what purpose is there in that, right? But I mean, like I think if he had just continued with that conversation, he could have revealed that. If I was in that boat, I would have done that. But again, this is what I'm talking about with like why Jordan Peterson has taken like a complete 180 on the woke stuff. Like he is one of the faces of the woke right. And this is a perfect example of that. No, I'm not even going to engage. I'm not going to engage because I don't have to. Or whatever his reasoning is for that. All right, we're going to do one.
So God says that you can own people.
Oh, sheesh. This is an 8er. So I don't know. Maybe we won't get to the... we could go a little later, though. We can go a little over the hour. Let's just play this, see what happens, and maybe we'll touch on the Piers Morgan stuff, or maybe I'll just do that for the members only. We'll see. So
God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod, too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think.
It's not out of context.
An analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
How do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with that
Well, I just think that it's an absurdity to say that.
Okay, 2 things here. I don't think this guy's playing a game. I think he's asking a genuine question. I think Jordan Peterson is framing it as he's playing a game. So again, he can come out the victor, right? And the whole, I mean, I was talking, the person I was talking with before this, I kind of made this point. I don't think there is a morality in war. There's zero morality in war. There's zero morality in violence. Self-defense, sure, but like, I don't think two governments engaging in war or two, yeah, I mean, that's what war is. I mean, it's governments engaging in war. Or like, you know, even if you had like two groups of people that were like all rounded up and like, hey, we're going to go fight this. Like, that's not self-defense. Self-defense is like when somebody is attacking you and you're defending yourself. But when it's at the point where you start charging at the other side, that's no longer defense, or that's no longer self-defense. And, you know, I think for a religion like Christianity, who bolstered the Crusades that killed 12 million people, bolstered colonization, which killed several million people and enslaved more people. And the only way to operate in that framework would be to be able to justify war. Say that, okay, hey, if we engage in war to, you know, induce this idea or to rid of these quote unquote bad people, that's justified. And the reason it's justified in their mind is because they're the ones who are superior. It's such an arrogant point of view to think that, oh, because I'm Christian, because I am of this whatever, it is okay for me to engage in war. And like no, I don't believe there's a moral framework for war. Okay, there's one moral framework. It's wrong. It's bad. On the moral compass, it's down here. It's one of the worst things you can do, next to flat out like genocide or pedophilia or what. Like it's literally one of the worst things that humanity has done. There's no moral framework for war, and it is typical Christian argument. Jordan Peterson, the same guy who, you know, supports Israel. It's no surprise that they would have this idea. And it's really interesting that he even sidesteps into the morality war. I mean, they weren't even really anywhere close to that. They were simply talking about slavery. But in order to avoid slavery, he somehow went into a position that was even worse. Okay. I think that speaks for itself, but not for everybody, apparently.
The Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical.
I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through the example. Yeah, so,
Look, he's getting defensive because he knows he's being intellectually dishonest. And this is, like I said, this is the woke right. 101.
Apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line with Christian ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean,
it's not the human past. I think he actually makes his point later, so maybe I should go. But he's not saying the human. He's not saying the human past. He's saying what God commanded. It's like this is the same thing with Isaac, like how God just said, like, hey, kill your son Isaac. But he stopped him at the end, I guess. So, but this is what you're gonna do. This is how you're gonna operate. It's just so shitty. But let's keep going.
You try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the
Yeah, he
problem.
does.
Yeah,
And that's
well-
what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God
Do you
saying,
think that
go
there's
and
ever
do this
such a thing?
atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
No.
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but this one
people,
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
well, a genocide can be a war, but
Absolutely not.
Look.
The genociding of the Amalekites,
Again, the pro-Israel guy would say that, right? He has to say that because the Daily Wires tells him to say that, right? That's not an ethnic cleansing. It's a war.
men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer
That right there, that revelation right there is Moronic Christianity 101. It's like the last one we did where I don't remember the point, but there was a point in the Charlie Kirk Bill Maher interview where it was the eternal suffering question, and Charlie Kirk just didn't have an answer because, and this is something Christians do, and this is something Jordan Peterson is doing right now. When you get to this crossroad where somebody points out, hey, logically, this is morally wrong. How can you justify this? And all they have to do is say, I don't know. Which is funny because, they will criticize atheists for not knowing things. But then when it comes to something that's actually damn important, that's actually a glaring logical fallacy, we don't have to have the answer because God's the answer. All right, let's keep playing.
I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm
Okay.
addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just maximally great in all
I
the
think
great
it's a
making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
By
like
definition.
flawless.
This goes back to the comment I was saying where he plays black hole, and this is the point that the guy previously made. Define perfect. Are you in fourth grade? Define what? Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay,
so
so
does a
wait a
flawless
second,
thing
wait a
change?
second.
Does a flawless thing reveal more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
that's totally fine, but
No,
presumably
no. You don't get to skate over
because
that
this is a
with
straw
that's
man.
totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position.
Yes,
it's a straw
you
man of
do.
the argument. So
In what
the
way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God,
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a
find
sec.
one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't
and
say
I
any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation
rephrase.
you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously.
Okay, and this is he pulls this card again. Don't be a smartass. This is wokeism. Don't be a smartass. Don't do this. Don't do this or I'm done. I won't hear it. I won't hear it. I can be whatever I want to be. Don't hear it. I'm not going to hear it.
I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Okay. rephrase your question so that, because I must
Sure.
have missed it. I tried
Conduct
to
yourself
answer it.
properly.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral,
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
our understanding might, but
Okay, how
presumably
do we
what the perfect
distinguish? How do
being
we
is
distinguish?
revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself?
Between our
we can only, yeah, well, we can only
Presumably
see
a
through our
perfect
own
being-
lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time
does
is
something-
revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So in
Like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
well, yeah, I
perfect in
blame this-
attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the
I would blame the phenomena. Just say.
point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
Wait
if
a sec. Wait, let's not go to that
because
yet.
you threw
100%.
free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that's
wouldn't God...
incoherent.
Well,
It's
1,000
contradictory.
years of deep-thinking philosophers would disagree with you, but
Yeah,
have
and
it your
1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool.
I don't-
So then the
I
free will
don't-
of the Odyssey fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you want to
tried to
respond to
make...
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make...
Oh my God. And this is the thing. This is just another example. Like, yes, he literally lost. Like, he literally, for lack of a better term, he lost that exchange. And he just said, well, have it your way. And again, Moronic Christianity 101. Don't engage with the question, with the prompt. Just ignore it. If the atheist does that, a lot of people are going to question that. If the religious person does that, it's okay. God, I love this.
a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with
Okay.
his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if
under
you want
your
to have
view,
it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue we're
Do you
discussing.
acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone
So-
like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world,
doesn't mean determined.
it's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it
causally,
determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it
The
doesn't.
semantics.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
okay.
That's not the case.
Okay, he was literally just playing semantics and not engaging with it. Just said, have your, like, I think honestly that was probably one of the best arguments from the atheist side of this whole video, and he just didn't engage with it because he didn't have to. Okay, guys, we're at the hour. I think this is a good place to stop. I know I wanted to talk about the Piers Morgan debate. Not even a debate. It wasn't even a debate. He was talking with Eric Weinstein or Eric Weinstein, I should say. Sorry, Eric. Him and Sean something, I forget. But he was talking to both of them about religion. So I think we're going to do a members only live stream Sunday, I think at 1 p.m. I'll post about it on Twitter and Facebook. The only way you can access that is through the Patreon, which I believe is $4 or $5 a month. Otherwise, if you want, there's a single tier, like you can just pay the one fee. But like, why do that? Why not just get the whole shebang, right? I didn't see any questions. I don't know if let me check again. I don't know if my YouTube's just disconnected or if let me see if I can refresh it. Refresh chat. Something went wrong. Okay, so if somebody asked me a question, I didn't see it, so I apologize. My bad. But I mean, look, you could do this if you want to ask something in the comments. Come Sunday, the live stream, I will discuss that. For lack of a better, we won't call it this, but for lack of a better term, we'll just call this Moronic Christianity Part 3 on Sunday for the live stream. We will dissect the Piers Morgan clip. We'll dissect one of the Bill Maher and Charlie Kirk clips that I didn't get to. I know it was a long time ago, but I think it's still good to look over and analyze. And we will. There was a clip with Tim Pool and Bill Maher, and I think Tim Pool, it was one of the most sensible stances on religion that I think I've ever heard. So I thought that, I still don't agree with it, but I think it was worth listening to. So anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate you. If you like what we do, give us a follow, give us a like, give us a subscribe. Consider donating in the description below, and consider, tuning into the Patreon, subscribing to the Patreon. Come tune in Sunday at 1 p.m. Central Time, and yeah, come hang out. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Peace.